Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to ADVMoto Live number 26, where we talk about super awesome new bike, Harley Davidson's new Pan America. You know, for decades now, overseas companies basically dominated the adventure motorcycle market. It seemed like the rest of the world realized how important this segment was, not only to riders, but to the industry itself. Sorely missing was a viable entry from the United States. Until just recently, Harley Davidson's new Pan America 1250 looks to be coming in hot and heavy. What's the scoop? How did it come to be? And how does it ride? Stay tuned to this episode of ADVMoto Live. But first, a little bit of quick news. This just in, the Motorcycle Industry Council has just reported that the new dual sport sales are up 47% this quarter compared to last year's first quarter. Now, the first quarter of last year, I think we were all kind of ramping up into the COVID madness, and I think at that point in time, a lot of us, especially in the industry, were wondering what was going to happen and trying to make adjustments. But, you know, seeing the second and third quarter comparisons will probably be more telling. Nevertheless, I'm always excited to see this kind of news. It explains a lot of stuff like why you can't buy anything from gear, armor, helmets, bags, everything seems to be sold out. I know that a lot of people in the industry are working hard to correct that right now and make this available to all those new riders. It's absolutely fantastic because, you know, 11 years ago when we took over ADVMoto, this class of bike virtually didn't exist as far as mainstream motorcycle media was concerned. And, you know, we had some discussion of this on a recent podcast, Motorcycles and Misfits, which we will put in the link below. But while more people have hopped on since, the fundamental message is the same. Practical, versatile, and comfortable bikes of all sizes have a demand in the US and beyond. So much so that brings us to tonight's hot topic. All right, we have some awesome guests tonight. Very lucky and happy to have them in the show with us. And they're ready to answer some questions on some burning issues here. What's up with the Pan America? Joining us tonight are not only fans of the bike, but some responsible for their launch and development. Everyone, please welcome Kelly Quinn, aka ThrottleGirl, Matt Swedlund up there in the top right, he's the PR lead, and Matt Paradise, lead engineer on the bottom. How's it going, guys?
Hey, going
awesome.
Good. Awesome. All right, everyone is unmuted and we are ready to roll. So what's life been like for you guys recently? I mean, you guys must have been really busy getting this bike rocking.
That's an understatement, but yes, especially during COVID. We were all, the three of us were just out in the desert riding these basically in the natural habitat. And that's probably why we're all here together to talk about it, but it's been a great ride for that part of it. A lot of work leading up to that moment though, let me tell you.
Oh, I'm sure, and we will dive into that a little bit later. But could you guys please give us just some very quickly your personal introductions, what you do and why you do it?
Yeah, I'll take the lead, I guess, on that one. I'm
Sure.
Kelly. I'm known as ThrottleGirl, who's been my coined nickname, if you will. And I am a motorcycle adventure tour as well as multi-sport adventurer. I have several different events within the motorcycle community, traditionally within the cruiser sector, where I help host events around the country at our larger rallies, raising money for things I care about and the industry cares about. And I'm also a long distance endurance rider. So I'm known for doing several different long distance riding, iron butt type style runs. That's my passion and that's my fuel.
Awesome. What charities do you kind of work on or develop, if you don't mind my asking?
Yeah, no problem. Primarily, my two causes for myself personally is I tend to rally around our U.S. veterans when it comes to homelessness and PTSD, the scars a lot of these men and women come home with that we don't see. That seems to pull me in that much more. So I always am rallying around our men and women in service and their families, as well as I am deeply connected to the Pine Ridge Reservation and my Lakota family there. And doing a lot of sustainability and empowerment and helping out in any way that I can there. Empower not only the people to, really preserve and uphold their own traditions and who they are as a people, but also empower them for a better tomorrow.
For sure. Sorry to interrupt, but I think we should do a separate show on that. Like on some of the veteran riding community and some of the programs and stuff like that. I know there's a lot of the motorcycle community. We've been, helping out some of the MRP for years. And if there is a topic that deserves a show, at least one, that is one of them.
I'd love to partake in that. I don't talk super outwardly about a lot of the service in the world. I have people also write in and tell me, will you please come help and support? So I do a lot of nonprofit management. And over the last decade, personally, as ThrottleGirl, I've helped raise over $800,000 for different charities, as well as, more importantly, it's more about moving more than wheels. And that's what I mean when I'm always calling out Throttle Up. And so that service in the world is near and dear to my heart.
Right on. You get mad applaud track. Mad applaud track for that one. Absolutely. Fantastic.
It's what we get to do.
All right. Excellent. Matt Swedlund?
Yeah, I've been a rider for almost 20 years now. My family has ridden for a long time, and actually my first motorcycle, my dad came home with a brand new 100th anniversary Road King, and he's like, "Hey, you want to ride?" I'm like, "Sure." He's like, "All right, go." So that was my first motorcycle. He brought it into the garage and just said, "Go ahead and take it." So I rode it around the block, and I was hooked, and ended up getting a little Yamaha that I rode for a number of years. And then I spent a lot of time in and around the motorcycle industry, working in advertising agencies for Harley, and now for Harley Davidson directly. And ironically, before I started at Harley, I was mostly a cruiser rider, but in the last 5 years have actually gotten into adventure touring, particularly with my dad, which has been great. We've done a trip in South Africa, and we did a ride in Patagonia all in the last 5 years. So it was a nice preamble, a nice way to just join Harley just before the Pan America launch. So I'm excited about that.
Well, that's awesome. And I'm sure that gave you some real direct experience, right? In trying to understand the crowd that this would be targeted to, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a different, different machine, different terrain. There's a lot of things that are different about it, and having that experience certainly helped to be able to, both talk to consumers and media, and help bring this project to life.
Yeah, awesome. And Matt Paradise, Dice, aka Chewy, if you go back far enough.
Thank you for that. Matt Paradise, I was the technical lead engineer on the project for Pan Am, which means I've basically been working on it for the last 4.5 years or so. I started at Harley as a college intern in engineering back in 2003, so I've been there for quite some time. Worked on lots of the big projects Harley's done over the years. This one was far, the most ambitious, I would say, is a good word for it. Being a new segment, performance at all costs, etc. So it's been a lot of fun, and being here talking to you at the end of this project, knowing that we got this to completion, that we were all riding it, and it's a great time to ride it. It's special for me to be here too. So excited.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks for taking the time. So that means that 2003, you've been there a while. So that means you came in probably right around the V-Rod, right?
We can talk about V-Rod. That was part, we were talking about some of the questions we might talk about here, and V-Rod has its place in this story here, so we can get into that.
Oh, very cool. Didn't know that. That's awesome. Okay, so, since it's such a new model that the general public you know, may not have heard of. I think a lot of people, and I think we already have some folks in here. Ojas Hemp House in the chat room says they got this Pan American special 2 weeks ago. I love it. Definitely need to put more miles on it. So we've got some current riders in the house. But you know, what are people's reactions when you know, kind of tell them what you're riding? You know, because it doesn't look like anything else, and you know, and it may be kind of confusing if you come up to, say, even a Harley rider that just hadn't happened to have heard about the release.
I've had people turn around to stop, like to chase me down, and I kid you not. Like, as a woman on a motorcycle, as it is, like, you know, you garner a little bit more of attention, because it's like, wow, a woman on a bike. And then, like, gas stations are impossible for me because I have a gift of gab anyway. And then now on this Pan America, there is no coming in like slow, or, you know, you're spending time. People are approaching you. They're wanting to know about it. Like I said, people, a father and son crew turned around and followed me and actually, you know, stopped me to ask questions. And there's a lot of excitement. A lot of people, and people are asking really good technical questions about the bike. They're not just like, oh, that's a pretty bike. Like, people want to know what's behind it. What's, you know, it's exciting to be a part of. It really is.
That's awesome. And guys, I mean, have you had any time to ride it in public?
Yeah, it's like Kelly said, it's a conversation starter. You know, when you roll into gas stations, particularly when we were out riding it in California, out in the desert, you know, there'd be other adventure riders who, you know, if we were riding just a cruiser, you'd, you know, do the cursory hello and say, you know, where you're going. But in this case, they immediately were like, hey, is that the Pan America? And they, like Kelly said, they dig right in and ask a bunch of questions. And that's cool. It's cool to have that interest and to be able to talk to these folks and explain, you know, how the bike was put together and answer all of their questions. It's fun. It's like Kelly said, it's hard to get out of the gas station sometimes.
Awesome.
You know, we talked about this bike years ago, now teasing it a little bit, which is pretty rare in product development. So this is the only project I've ever worked on where we were able to talk about it openly and actually ride them on the streets during the testing phase, which was pretty cool. And so if you follow Harley, or if you're just watching casually the motorcycle world, you probably have heard about it at least a little bit over the last couple of years. So the people who know are already looking for it, and that's what I think makes the cool conversations when you run into someone like that.
Yeah, right on, right on. All right, so let's go ahead and dive right on in. Let's start at the very beginning, square one. So, I mean, for years, a lot of people were wondering, you know, if the motor company was going to come out with something in this segment. You know, I know that there was a guy that took a Sportster-based motor, you know, made the frame. He was actually on our 100th issue cover. I mean, it was a beautiful bike. There was a lot of work into it. And then later on, there were some guys that were selling scrambler kits for Sportsters and stuff like that. And so it seemed like people were just chomping at the bit to get something, you know, off-road at Harley, you know what I mean? So, you know, where did the idea come from? You know, how about the name Pan America? I mean, where did that come from? And were there any alternatives that bounced around?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you know, honestly, the impetus for this bike came from consumer research. So we have a you know, pretty in-depth product planning team, and they are always, you know, continuously doing research on, you know, the existing segments that we're in, you know, outside segments that we may play in. And as they were doing all of that research, it became very clear that, you know, like you said, there was a lot of interest already in a Harley, an American adventure touring bike. So they kind of went through all of that process, you know, putting all the pieces together. And then that's when Matt and his team got involved and started, you know, benchmarking and figuring, okay, if we're going to do this, you know, what does this look like? And what are the things that we have to hit? You know, what are those tech pieces that we have to hit, you know, in order to be competitive? So there was, I mean, and Matt can talk a bit more about it, but, you know, the goal was we knew that going into, if we were going to jump into this segment, it's a super competitive segment, and people are, you know, very proud of the specifications of their, you know, the particular model that they ride. So we took a humble but confident approach, and hey, this is how we're going to get into this segment. And, you know, Pan America, the product naming is always kind of a fun challenge. You can be just all over the board, but in general, you're trying to find a name that both fits with the brand and also with the motorcycle, kind of the attributes and what you want that name to portray. And the Pan American Highway is the longest motorable road in the world. So that made sense from the beginning to go with Pan America, and it's worked out really, really well so far. And everybody's, like Matt said, everybody's super happy with the result and where we're at.
Yeah, the development story behind, because you mentioned V-Rod, which is why I wanted to talk about it right here, because I think it's a pretty cool story. So as Matt was mentioning, with lots of research, where's Harley going to go into new markets? At the same time, V-Rod was on its way out. It was 2016, 2017. That was the last model year for V-Rod. We knew we could make horsepower with a 60-degree V, the way we did on V-Rod. So we were looking at, what's the next performance Harley going to be? Where's it going to fit? While this research was going on, and it ultimately led to we want to be an adventure touring. We think we could play. Where the V-Rod thing comes into play is it's a 60-degree V structure. We did a couple things differently. There's no parts that are the same as a V-Rod. Everything's completely new, but the bore and stroke are the exact same as the last V-Rod 1250. So we started there. We knew we could make that horsepower. We built a whole new motor off of that platform. So that's what I thought the cool development started. And then we married that to where the customer research was telling us, where can we put a performance Harley Davidson? And all that came together. And as Matt was saying, we set stringent requirements of top performance that we wanted to meet. We'll talk about that later, but it's that's where it came from, development wise and customer research.
Wow, that's awesome.
And part of it too, I'll say, the cool part is, adventure touring is also in the history. You don't think of adventure touring right off the bat when you think of Harley, but you go back, Harley's coming up on 120 years. And I was sitting at the museum, the Harley Museum, sitting in the restaurant a couple of years ago, and they're always playing archival footage. And there were guys, it was easily from the mid 30s, early 40s, just doing water crossings, going into the woods. I mean, there definitely is kind of that adventurous spirit and that adventure riding mentality that's been in the kind of the essence of the brand. And it's moved on road, since the advent of the interstate system, but that's baked in the essence of the brand. And that's what we felt like, us going into adventure touring feels right. And like Matt said, from the technical side, we knew we could get there from a performance aspect.
Absolutely. Some of the coolest people I ever met on the road were straight up riding Harleys, awesome people. And also some of the most mile eating people I've ever met were on Harleys. I remember I was coming down the Blue Ridge Parkway one time, and we just pulled over at an overlook, and this little guy runs up on a little Honda, I think it's those Honda Elite scooters, and his name, I think, was Dave Willett, and I think his bike is in your museum. Anyway, he carried around pictures of himself, and he told us his stories. I think he did something like 500,000 miles on his bike, and then traded it in, I guess, and this would have been in 03. So Harley Davidson gave him a new bike, but he kept a log. He had this like massive encyclopedia sized log of every single oil change. And I guess that's what the engineers were really after. But that's actually where I got my little ride safe, have fun with. He says like, well, what do you want me to write on it? And I said, just give me some words of wisdom from a guy that's been around. And he straight up says, ride safe, have fun. And I still use that to this day. And it's, absolutely fantastic. Just absolutely, some of the best people. But to kind of go back to the question, sorry to interject, were there any other alternative names, or is that kind of like industry secret stuff? But were there any weird names that were bouncing around?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit of an industry secret. I think we kind of landed on Pan America pretty quickly, and that was just one that we always circled back with. So it just seemed to fit the best from the beginning.
Okay, awesome. So we've seen manufacturers make even slight direction changes on their model lines, and sometimes there's a mixed feeling about changing the quote-unquote core of what a brand represents. And I've seen, personally, sometimes this has caused a little bit, I don't say friction, but there was some misunderstandings internally, when a new product like this is in development. Some folks are really excited to see it. and some see it as necessary, while others are more resistant to change. Were there any mixed feelings about this project, initially from your guys' side?
No, not really, because like I said, the product planning team had, he had that stack of, his oil logs. They had the same thing, a stack of research that really showed that, I don't remember the exact number, but there, a huge percentage of Harley riders also had an adventure touring bike in their garage and were open to Harley having a adventure touring option. And then the research, in the segment also showed that there was this desire to have an American option. So, from the very beginning, it just seemed like, the right decision. And there, everyone's like, okay, and like Matt said, the conversation twists then, okay, now how do we do this? And what are those benchmarks that we have to hit? So it just made, like I said, it made a lot of sense right from the start.
Is it possible to comment on when you guys actually started, working on this as a concept, roughly even?
I'll give you two thoughts on that. It's not really true to say a date or a time because of some of this thinking and what we were going to do. What was it going to be? That that didn't really start the clock, if you will. But I will say, to Matt's point, so the project I was working on last, right before this, was Milwaukee 8, which was the classic Harley engine that's out there right now. And keeping the look, sound, and feel of Harley in that motor was extremely important. And I was passionate about it. So when I first came over to Pan America, I did have my own reservations, changing Harley's look, sound, and feel for a different platform. But this is going into a completely new space. We believed we could bring something to the table that was Harley, that was North American, by what we had with the design of the motor, by the architecture of the vehicle, and some of the innovations we brought that we can talk about later, like hydraulic lash adjustment for no valve adjustment, and the lowering of the suspension at stops, things like that. So we were pretty confident we were coming into a market with a great bike, and that's where we started. So there was some trepidation, I would say, because it is very different than every other Harley that's out there. But we also did Livewire a year ago or so. And Matt, it's probably what you're thinking too about when we changed direction. So there was some of it, but again, it's in a whole new segment, and we traded off some of those things to get performance because this was a no nonsense vehicle.
Yeah, and a lot of those, like Matt said, a lot of those questions were pretty easily answered by the research. So when you're thinking like, well, should this happen? Well, we had all the data from product planning team to be like, no, this is what we need to do. And like Matt said, he's been working on this project for a little over 4 years, and every project is different. Every product's different depending on the when it starts. And like I said, there's not really an exact date because that research kind of evolves over time as they're going through their processes. But it's been about that long, and we're just, like Matt said, excited to see it out in the wild now.
Awesome. So much of the bike is.
As a consumer, I was incredibly excited about this bike. Like, just the fact that Harley, like, I'd always been bar and shield girl, eating up the miles out there in my endurance stuff, but I'm also have other sides of me as a guide out in the world. I have a skiing background. I spend a lot of times trekking and loving river play these years. And so for me to get out into other parts of the world and be able to really harness more of who I am as a personality and access these remote places, I had jumped ship and I started actually working for a company and working as a coach in training and a guide for a company that actually uses a different bike that is one of the contenders of Harley. And so having time on that bike, when I got the opportunity a couple years ago now to actually put my leg and ride one of the prototypes, I knew at the very first swing of my leg over it in the first ride that Harley Davidson was on to something incredibly special. And me jumping ship and going to these other bikes to access what I want to do in my global travel in the world, like, it made sense. It was Harley, they were coming out with it. It fits so many personality, desires, needs out there. And quite frankly, it fits better than any bike I've ever I've ever sat on in this space personally. So I can't wait to get into that more with you as well.
Awesome. Now, also, this is a little bit off, but it's just like you know, when we first saw, you know, as market slash like consumer, when we first saw the leaked images of what the bike was going to look like, I was going to be straight with you. Some of us was kind of scratching our heads. What was a visual inspiration for the bike?
Yeah, you know, if you there's a couple different things. So like Matt mentioned it earlier, you know, one of the, again, you're trying to find a balance between the brand DNA and doing something a little bit different.
Yeah.
And our styling department, you know, obviously one of the key tenets to Harley Davidson styling is the engine as like kind of the crown jewel. So we wanted to have that from the beginning, wanted to keep that. A lot of the cruisers kind of have that triangle where you go, you know, from the bottom up to the tank to the back, and the Pan America has more of a linear line. And so then it was kind of taking in some of those other styling cues and figuring out, okay, we're going to do a front end that's a little bit different. You know, we did a lot of competitive research, and a lot of other bikes, you know, look a lot the same, have a kind of a pointed beak look. So we wanted to do something different. And if you look at the Pan America, and we've talked about it, it has a little bit of that feel of a road glide. You know, that front headlight kind of feels like a little bit like the Fat Bob. So it's kind of piecing and picking a few of those brand tenets and then coming up with something a little bit different. So you're always trying to find that line. And the partnership between our styling team and our engineering team is pretty amazing. And it's kind of a, you know, I wouldn't say it's not fighting, but it's you know, it's kind of like a little tug of war trying, okay, we want to do this, and then engineering's like, okay, how are we going to do that? And they're trying to that back and forth, I think, is one of, you know, Harley Davidson's strengths. And even when you look at like the cruising bikes or touring bikes, you line up a 2021 next to a 2000, visually they look very similar, and that's a conscious decision. But technology wise, underneath in that 2020 is, you know, worlds different, you know, the suspension, the electronics. So that, you know, finding those, trying to make that happen, keeping that classic style, but, you know, bringing in that technology, the modern technology is a huge undertaking. And it was the same for Pan Americas. We knew, like I said, we knew we had to have a lot of these different specs and a lot of these different technologies to be competitive. And when you talk about, Matt mentioned, you know, like adaptive ride height was something new that we thought would be really, really vital. So trying to bring that all into the bike, but also make a very visually appealing platform. So again, it's really cool to listen. If you go back to, you know, I would encourage people to go back and rewatch some of the video from the launch of Brad Richards, who's the VP of styling, and how he talks about it, and really get an understanding of kind of that their POV and what they're trying to accomplish.
That's cool. Did you guys document the process at all?
Yeah, I think there's some footage that we've kind of pulled in. Some of it was in that kind of the launch media that we came out with. And we usually, as you know, particularly as products are coming out, we will document that stuff, and it gets used eventually at, you know, at later points.
Yeah, awesome. So, you know, performance-wise, we've only heard good things. I know, you know, Kelly has talked to me a little bit about this, but also some other people, you know, as well as our own Justin Coffey, who went out to the junket. You know, actually, the Pan America will be on the cover of our next issue. I think he worked very hard with the photographer Kevin out there to get some quality cover shots, you know, and basically everyone said, man, this thing just got gobs of power. I was surprised by the weight, you know, but by the low weight. But, you know, like any ADV or dual sport design, there must have been a fair amount of challenges in designing a bike that, you know, is truly versatile on and off road. Everybody from anywhere that we've ever talked to says, you know, how do you design a bike that can take hard hits and jump, but at the same time be comfortable and smooth on, you know, the pavement and, you know, carving, you know, canyons and stuff like that. So what are some of the challenges that you guys encountered, and, you know, how did you sort of tackle them as far as developing the bike performance and stat wise?
Yeah, so the stats, the specs, the horsepower, the fuel range, all those things were things that we benchmarked, and we knew we weren't going to compromise on them. And that's where the hard work came in. When we talk about the styling and engineering working together, we wanted to show that engine. We wanted to show the mechanically interesting engine, which isn't really typical in this, in this segment. We wanted to bring the Harley, what we thought was most important in this segment, to the bike, and we didn't compromise on it. Weight was number one. Cost was up there. 150 horsepower, like I said, 250 miles of riding range. All those things drive certain choices to the motorcycle. One other thing is the ergonomics of when you sit, when you straddle the bike, and how much the tank is pushing on your legs. To ride it aggressively on street for sport riding, we had strong requirements there. So what that did was to show the engine and accomplish all those things. You're pushing the airbox, the fuel tank, and the frame above the engine, which isn't typical in the segment. That's a hard engineering challenge to make the shapes, the style, and keep the weight down, keep the low center of gravity, etc. And so we made some tough choices. We made that fuel tank out of a modern process aluminum, which is a pretty cool shape to make aluminum that way. For that reason, it's the highest part on the bike, and we made aluminum save about 7 pounds there, with the battery down low. And we knew exactly where we wanted to hit all those things, like I was saying. And to that trade-off of stretching what it looked like and where parts could go on the bike, and finally coming up with, what we thought was the Harley version of an adventure bike that met all those specs, that did not compromise anything. This is not a big twin Walkie 8 with knobby tires. This is a all new motorcycle that competes in every category that it can. And that's where that hard work came in. It was the trade-off balance between all those things, and we just didn't stop until we got there. And that's really what the bike is.
Man, that sounds like it just must have been a ton of work. You know what I mean?
Work.
Yeah. So for example, one of the hardest power delivery is, some bikes have more, some bikes have less, and they deliver in different ways. But suspension is one of the things that basically every adventure dual sport bike has to have sorted. You know what I mean? So were there any particular details on how you guys sorted that out?
Well, the suspension is one of the bright spots of the bike. It really is, with the electronic modes and the selectable damping, the adaptive ride height that lowers at a stop. It really works well. The adaptive ride height, we always thought was the ace up the sleeve in this market. We could deliver a Harley that competed on all these specs and also dropped the seat height and brought more people to the sport on a full-blown adventure bike that had full capability. We thought it was going to be a big deal and a big hit. But the suspension, even without that, the normal suspension that you get with the active damping and things like that, it's just a really great system. And when you flip between the modes, between sport mode where it firms it up, or you go to a little bit more plush, it'll eat up the road if you wanted to, and it'll be taut when you wanted to, and everything in between. So it's a bright spot of the bike for sure.
Well, that's awesome. And I hope we have a chance to see one here on the East Coast, and I get a chance to put my butt in one, because it sounds really exciting. It's fantastic. So Kelly, you've been riding this for a little while. Could you give us like a little mini review of how the bike rides?
Yeah, if I start back to I got to ride the Pan America when it was, there was only 10 prototypes in the world at that time. It was a little nerve-wracking, to be honest, when you're sitting on something when there's only a few of them, right? And ride this. I knew then at that point in time, just watching the crew and knowing what they were going through to really fine tune the details of this bike. But as a rider, again, coming from your traditional Harley market, and quite frankly, no matter how many hundreds of thousands of miles logged, when you transfer over from this segment into the adventure world, many of the bigger bikes are quite intimidating. And for me personally, while I love the power, I ride a road glide, that's my go-to. So for me, a big bike is kind of my staple, right? So I'm used to that. But even then, like these big 1250s were ginormous and intimidating. So when I sat on that original prototype, I knew right then, and it didn't even have the adaptive ride height at that time, but I could still sit there with my balls of my feet completely flat. And it just felt so balanced. The tank is streamlined. and everything about that thing just sung really user friendly. And so I was really excited about that out of the gate. And of course, at that point in time, there was a lot of stuff we were ironing out, or Harley was anyway, and I just got lucky to be along for the ride. Fast forward a few years later, coming to the US launch, I was invited again, and that's where Matt and I had an opportunity to have a lot of fun and really put it through the paces, the production bike, like this is what it was going to be. And that was the first time I had ever experienced the adaptive ride height. And as it's already, that's a game changer. That's going to be a game changer, I think, for the industry wide. You know, so to come out of the gate with not only a new bike in a segment that's very well established, and then to come out shooting with something brand new like that that's going to revolutionize is huge. So hats off to you guys on that one. But as we were riding around, and we got to rip around the Mojave Desert, and we got to do a lot of scouting for the press launch routes and different things. And so in those days, we took 550 miles, and we got to really experience twisty mountain roads. We got to experience off-road, the different tires that are available, the different accessories, really just got to sink the claws in it. And right then I knew I was all in. My favorite miles, if I had to, my favorite miles are off-road. This bike is a dirt bike in so many ways, and I love that. I absolutely love that it's a chain drive, and everybody's going to have an opinion on that. But again, when you know your goals as a rider and what you want to accomplish on a bike, I want to travel the world, and I want to do that with a chain bike. While maybe a little bit more maintenance, it's going to get me in places where I could get myself out of a bind and be back on the road. And that's really important for me. And just like anything else, for the people crossing over and start, educate yourself. What does it mean to have a chain drive, And it's really simple, really, once you know, but it is. There's some maintenance involved. So off-road for me, I have a little 250L in my garage that I have outfitted as a little BDR bike. And there was one time we were up by this mine shaft and coming down, and it was loose rock and dirt and coming down on this. And there was a couple times where I was like, I just cannot believe that this is a 1250. There's no way. This might as well feel right now as just an extension of me, like my little 250L. Granted, it's bigger, obviously, right? But I mean, that's pretty extreme. But that is just how in love with how it fits. It just becomes an extension of you. I call it riding my dragon, right? It just becomes a part of me, and I'm over the moon with the way it fits. And then when you talk about the power.
What's up with the power? I mean, like, what are your thoughts on the power and the way it gets delivered, especially off-road? Because, a lot of people, the torque is, it's a pro and a con when you're off-road, depending on how you're riding.
But it's so incredibly smooth. It never lets up. It rolls all the way through. So, I mean, it's got power on the low end and the high end, and it just carries it so smoothly through the entire process. It's actually, like, I kept telling Matt when we were riding it together, I'm like, you should be really proud of you and your team with building a motor like this. And
yeah, Matt D, so how did you spec the power delivery on that motor throughout the rev range? Is it different when you're trying to you do it for a cross or off-road application versus just street? There must be some differences.
Lots of differences in the calibration. The overall, top horsepower number that we talked about, the 150 horsepower, and also drivability with some torque down low. Typically, when you're making high revving, high horsepower engines, you're missing something somewhere, and that's where we added that VVT system. So we got a pretty complex VVT system on each cam, and that was our way of getting that low end torque drivability back down low without sacrificing the 150 horsepower number that we really wanted. But then our calibration team just rode tons and tons of miles and all sorts of trails in every condition, and really dialed in how the throttle body reacts to what you're doing with your hand. And that's really why it feels as good as it does.
Oh, awesome. So
its power is so impressive. It really, I mean, until people experience, and even on the street, on the tarmac, like you said, how can you have one that does one so well but does the other so well? And you can say that about almost every aspect of this bike, as far as I'm concerned. Like, even in the turns and on the tarmac, the amount of, like, I use cruise control, not because I just want to keep a steady speed. I'm using cruise control because I need it to simmer my happy ass down. This bike wants, it's a little rocket ship. It wants to go. And I need, I need it to keep me in check, quite frankly. And you can say that about the size of the bike too. Josh, who's also a team member of Harley, who's not here tonight, he's actually a rather large man. And, he's a big boy, and we would sit there and we would talk, and he'd be like, he goes, how is it possible that I can sit on this bike and say that this is the best fitting bike I've ever sat on, but you, a 5'7" woman, can sit here and say the exact same thing?
Josh is 6'6", right? 6'6", 6'7". He's a tall dude.
There are some bikes that are like that, though. I don't know what it is, but it's just a magic geometry thing. One of the ones for me that was odd, was like that, was, I don't know if you guys remember the old Ninja 250s. I'm over 6 feet. I could ride that thing all day, and my wife is, maybe a little over 5 feet. If she could ride that thing comfortably, I never saw anyone get on that bike that felt uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Some bikes are just built like that. That's awesome. So how many miles have you racked up on it so far?
So, so at the media ride, between the prototypes and stuff, I have 550 miles there. Recently, because I knew I was all in, I didn't want to mess around. I dropped in and said, I'm owning one of these. I need one of these in my barn. And so I purchased one down in Vegas, which is where it sits now. And I put 1,000 miles on that. And we have 1,000 miles on it right now. And I'm just going to be real honest, because it's part of a story and it's part of the adventure that is the story. And I've had troubles with it. I've had troubles along the way, and I'm not going to say it's because it's a new bike. And I'm not going to say that the issues that I feel that I'm having with this bike is something that any bike would have. I feel like I'm just a lucky lottery winner. And, in some ways I want to say that I'm glad that it's me, because I do have people that I can call and we can talk and try to figure out what's going on. So, but then at the same time, I'm not going to sugarcoat the fact that it's a little bit of a disappointment as a consumer coming out, but I know that it's going to get fixed. I know it's just a speed bump. And if anything, it's made me I have gotten more intimately connected to my bike. I was telling Matt earlier, I was like, we can start talking about like the different stuff in the motor now and the components. Let's talk phasers. Let's talk,
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Good old phasers. Well,
right?
Over the past decade or so, I've been doing this. We've seen lots of bikes get launched, and it just happens. If you're an early adapter of a model, sometimes those things just happen. But really the main thing is how is it supported? So what is the Harley Davidson kind of like policy on that?
Yeah, we I think one thing to realize too, and you maybe mentioned it earlier, we're just as disappointed. We want folks out riding. So that's why we put a huge emphasis on customer service. Customer service is, a vital part of all of our product launches. And we have a full process that we go through. So when somebody, like Kelly, taking the bike into the dealership, the dealership does a diagnostic that goes back to our customer service team. And that's something that's becomes kind of a hub. And then we're able to, work through those issues and get people back out on the road. And I think that's, like I said, it's just something where we want to have those steps in place, because we want people back out riding as much as they do. So, and we've all been there. It's frustrating. And I can tell you that we have customer service conversations every week. That's something that we're very, very focused on.
Absolutely. I'm sure it's an ongoing thing. I think a lot of people, especially when they're excited about an awesome new model like this, set really high expectations. Like I said, I've seen it before, but at the end of the day, they're machines and we're people, and we have to give each other some room to be both. Kelly, did you want to say something? It looked like you said.
Yeah, I do want to comment on that. It's amazing, how the support is what Harley Davidson in this country is known for. And there's reasons, as in the cruiser sector with my Road Glide and some of the ambitious stuff I've taken on doing on that bike, I have stuck with Harley over the year, and I'm not a team rider, I'm not an ambassador. You know, I've stuck with Harley though, because I know that within 100 miles, I can get service. I can zoop in and get an oil change and be right back out on the road, and they prioritize that. And that's a really comforting feeling. So I think as the Pan America, especially, you know, it's new. So people are getting used to new, and there's that whole part, and that's understandable. That's part of it. And I think
it takes time.
Yeah, it's going to be a well-oiled machine when it's going, and that should give people a lot of confidence as time goes on here, that it's solid and that's something to rely on.
Awesome. So where do you guys see the Pan America fitting into the current adventure market space? I mean, as you guys mentioned earlier, right? I mean, there's a lot of bikes in there now, definitely more than there was 10 years ago. You know what I mean? And I mean, so how do you see it fitting in, and who do you think is its closest competitor?
Oh,
That's a good question. You know, we, like Matt said, we didn't want to compromise on the tech and spec, and the goal was to make a very capable but approachable motorcycle. So if you compare the Pan America with a lot of the competitors, it's kind of tough to pick one, because we've got more horsepower than another, but we got more torque than another. One of them might have a little more torque. The Pan America was meant to kind of sit right in the middle and be competitive on a lot of those, the tech and spec, with that additional suspension, adjustable ride height to make it even more approachable. And that's really what we're trying to do, is trying to open up adventure touring to more riders. And so you kind of put all that stuff together. Obviously, BMW is the leader, so we want to make them nervous and have a product that's very, very capable. But like I said too earlier, we did not want to just kind of come in and say that we've got this, we've got the best bike. We wanted to come in with a bike that spoke for itself and be humble but confident, knowing that this segment is so competitive.
Yeah, it's awesome. And spec wise, Matt Paradise, how do you feel that it stacks up? I know you talked a lot about targeting, the specs that existed in the market when you built it. But I mean, you guys feel pretty confident that you've met that or exceeded it?
We met our internal requirements, and to lean on what Matt was saying, we didn't go for the highest horsepower in any of these segments. We some of the things I talked about earlier about how big the airbox could be, where the frame is, where the fuel tank was. Had we gone for peak horsepower above all else, the bike would look a lot different than it does right now. But the key to this bike is balance. Balance is the term. It's what we believed was the requirements that are needed to be right there with the full-blown adventure bikes. When we planned this out years ago, we even looked a little bit ahead where we thought they could be at this point in history, and we think we're right there. But then also the bike is just so well balanced at so many things: sport riding, on-road, off-road. The modes allow you to basically, you can leave off-road mode on and really not think about it, or you can turn it all off and ride it like a dirt bike. All those things combined with high-speed stability, fully loaded, you can carry it at 135 miles an hour, which is also really rare in the motorcycle segment. All those things, it's not compromising on any of those things that we thought would make a great motorcycle. And the result of that is a nicely balanced motorcycle that does so many things very well. So it's hard to say, if you compare, not to name any names, but the other ones in this segment, you'll find little things that they're better at in certain segments, like Matt was saying. The Pan Am is right there in all of them. It might not be the absolute leader in any particular category, but balance is where it shines.
Right on. So would you guys say this is the most versatile bike Harley has made? I mean, I know that's a lot to say, but
I'm going to let you say that.
This is the most versatile bike Harley Davidson has made.
Well, I mean, it really, that was like Matt said, that was the goal. And if you could do a spec comparison and you look at, seat height, weight, horsepower, torque, everything, it kind of goes like this along the spectrum. It really is, truly a very versatile and approachable motorcycle. So you can get on it, and like we experienced I experienced, watching some of the media guys who were just crazy good riders, and they turned everything off and were doing some, they were jumping it, they were doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And
Wow.
I could get on it as a relative, new rider and feel confident and get through some terrain as well. And then Kelly was nice enough to drop her bike after I dropped mine just to make me feel better. So I feel better. So thank you.
For you.
Yeah.
Bike droppers love company.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
It's
that's
true. Like the number one thing that people, well, yeah, I'll leave that tip later. But the number one thing that I mean, I have a BMW 1200 GS in the barn right now, and so I can rip out of the garage tomorrow and ride that, and it's a great bike. I will never talk. It's a great bike. The Harley Davidson for me is a better fitting bike as a woman, as a lady rider. But I love them both. They both are apples and oranges. I would have, like these gentlemen are saying across the board, this bike excels. Like when that's the number one question I'm being asked, that is, what is this bike like? What would you compare it to? Which one in its class? And quite frankly, you can't, like, it's got enough of our KTM, like kind of your hardcore dirt lover in there, and then it's got your tarmac eating, loving, traveling America BMW in there. And I mean, it's taken the best of everything, and it's just there. I'd say the second question I'm getting asked all the time is, I'm going to trade in my Road Glide and just have it. And that's an important, I think, when people are out there looking for bikes and really know what it is, your riding style and what you're wanting to do. And that goes to picking out of any of the brands, even in the same sector. Like, what kind of riding do you want to get to know? Like, I am not going to trade in my Road Glide. If I want to do a 50cc and scoop Pacific and then scoop Atlantic, I'm probably going to take my Road Glide, because that thing is a road couch and that's what it's made for, right?
Mm-hmm. Right on.
And, but for me wanting to get in the back country and go into South America, and there's no other bike I'd rather be on than an ADV, and this Pan America is paving the way for that for me.
Awesome. That's awesome. So looking down the road, what do you guys hope the Pan America does for both developing riders and the industry, in the next 5-10 years or something like that? I mean, in your mind, when you think it's like, man, what would make this a success for us? Not just in terms of sales or anything, but in terms of how it contributes to, the genre of riding in people's lives. What do you hope it does?
Sure. I think there's two parts to that. I think from a industry aspect, or, adventure riding aspect, we're hoping that this brings more people into the sport. And by creating a very approachable motorcycle, no matter whether you're a beginner or you're advanced, this is going to bring, more people, make it easier for more people, hopefully, to get into adventure touring. And from our side of things, this is an awesome opportunity to showcase the talent that Harley has, with Matt and his team and the styling team, and really showing and proving to the industry and consumers that we can think outside the box. We are thinking outside the box, and we're coming with something that's really, really cool and is really performs well. So it's kind of a combination of those things. We always felt like there's a space for Harley in the adventure touring, and we're looking to, and bring our flavor to the party.
Dice Man, what do you think?
I mean, I'm glad we got the PR guy with us, because I'll probably say something that I should.
Yeah, we're gonna have to talk after this, Matt.
To lean on what he said, I think it opens up, like I said earlier, this full-blown adventure sport to so many more people with lower suspension and the capability that it has. And if you wanted to, it will help you, ride things that you might not on bikes with less technology. So the modes, the advanced ABS, the traction control, all these things with the adaptive suspension allow a fairly novice rider to do things on that bike that, including me, that you wouldn't dream of on an older version or a less technology version motorcycle. So that's where I think the big benefit is, that people give it a chance and find themselves checking out this sport, the bike will help you get through it and deliver on something like that. If that happens enough, maybe it catches fire in the country.
Right on, man. You know, that actually chimes up with a comment that just came in the chat room by a regular viewer, Donna Main. He said, "If I like the Pan America, I'll trade my Monster in a heartbeat." Riding Ducati, you never know where Pan America riders will come from, right?
Well, that's a big part of it too, is, doing, again, the product planning team doing the research. There was a distinct opportunity that this would be the way to bring new riders, into the brand. And, one of the guys that I know out in California, he just bought his very first Harley was a Pan America. His dad was always a Harley rider, and until this bike, he was like, man, just not for me. And when he saw the first photo of the Pan America, he's like, that's the one. And he's having a great time. So that was, also the opportunity, is just bringing more people into the umbrella, helping to grow the sport, because Harley is such a, big player in the industry. So, and we've seen that. We've been going and demoing at a bunch of the adventure riding rallies, and it's just been so cool to see, the looks on people's faces and the reactions when they're like, wow, this is a really good bike. It's so cool to see you guys here. It's just, it's really fun. I think, as much back and forth that people give each other for the different brands, overall, there's just a really good community in motorcycling. People just want to ride. People just want to have fun. So this is just another area for us to play in and, like I said, bring something different to the table.
Awesome. Now, so from here, where do you think the Pan Am or the Pan America can evolve? And maybe even more importantly, to push limits here a little bit on the live show. Are there any chances of a smaller, mid-sized adventure or scrambler down the trail? I think people were frothing at the mouth for some kind of a scrambler version to come out from Harley Davidson. Maybe not. Don't know. Can't say.
Well, this, like Matt said earlier, this bike we were with for the first time, I think, in maybe ever, we released photos of this bike early. And that's just what we decided to do before this launch. Now we're kind of back into not talking about, new product until we're ready to talk about it. But I will say that this platform definitely opens doors for us. So it's going to be exciting.
Awesome.
To go back to the point before as well, like, as that girl crossing over, right, and experiencing it the last couple of years, that journey, I will have to say that once you cross over into the dirt and into the ADV sector, it actually makes you a better street rider.
Yeah.
But it's important to also know, I'm safety girl, and all my friends and at camp and stuff, everybody knows safety girl. So like, I highly recommend that people take a course. There's courses all over this country. Yes, there's the camp that I've worked at, and there's a ton of different places where people can go get the skills, but be prepared as a rider who has spent a lot of time being ingrained that dirt bad, gravel bad, drop bike bad, right? This is a different world. And as we said before, I always tell my people at the camp too, like, you're gonna drop your bike at some point. We're testing new skills, we're learning, right? Like, we're learning new stuff. It's like telling a whitewater kayaker not to roll their bike. So you might as well or their boat. So you might as well just get used to it, right? Like,
right.
And so, I mean, there's these there's these like different things that people need to get used to, but it does make a person a better rider on the street as well. And I thought that was really cool and huge.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo that. Matt and I did the day of training after we rode for 2 days in the dirt, which was I would not recommend that. Do the training but when we did it, we talked about it afterwards. Just like, it was totally eye-opening. Like, oh, okay, this is why I dropped my bike twice. This is why I went down. I was like, I totally understand now why that happened. And so doing that, even just a couple days of training, and the group that Kelly works for, they do a good job, great job of doing that. It makes a huge difference. There was Justin Coffey, who was with us during that one training day. He's, very, very good rider, very experienced, and even he came away with it and was like, yeah, actually, it's such a great reminder of little things that you kind of forget. So if it's, brand new or experienced, more training is always better.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Better to have the knowledge than not. So, there's a hot new bike out. We've got a couple things. One is, how does the supply look for folks wanting to get a hold of one? How do they do that? And I know you guys have a fleet or some semis going around the country, offering some test rides. How does someone find out about those?
Yeah, so we have, there's a couple different ways. The easiest thing to do is just to contact your closest dealer. We have several demo trucks that have the breadth of our product lineup in them that are going around the country. And then we also are doing a specific Pan America demo tour. And I have written down here a few of the different, like they're doing Laconia. So the demo tour is going to Laconia here. Also the Get On Moto Fest in South Dakota. It'll be at Sturgis, Dirt Days. We're really kind of doing a lot of these adventure events, and then also some specific dealer tour events. So if you Google Harley Pan America demo tour, you'll have a full list of where those are at. Plus, many dealers, the bikes are in dealers now. They're continuing to roll into dealers. Obviously, the demand is pretty high, so we're doing our best to keep up with that. But many dealers do have one demo unit. So I would just say my advice is to call your dealer. They might have a demo unit, or they'll know when the demo truck is coming into your area.
How about being able to purchase them? Are they pretty limited the first year, or?
We're going to keep producing them. It's like I said, the demand is high. So there probably will be a little bit of a wait at this point, but we're kicking them out as quickly as we can.
Awesome. And a question from the room real quick is from Dan. Is there a Harley Davidson training camp coming?
That's a good question. That's definitely something that we're looking into. I would say we have done a training camp for our dealers, and what has become a massive training program specifically for this bike. One of the biggest ways this is going to be a success is if dealers understand this bike, they understand adventure riding. So we have been since I think April, we've been doing 3-day camps in California and sending dealers from all over the country to go ride the bike, get a really good understanding of the adventure touring segment and the bike. And so I think there's an opportunity to do that down the road for consumers too.
Awesome. That's so cool. You guys got the whole thing going here. Excellent. All right. Well, last but not least, any words of advice for people looking to bring adventure riding into their lives? Kelly, you want to kick that off?
Well, goodness, I think I already kind of I hit on the biggest point. There's some things that we get so trained as people that are riding on the road, traditional style, that off-road, like safety, like take a course, educate yourself, take it easy when you get out there at first. Braking's different, playing in the friction zone, just familiarize yourself with the bike. And, it's really easy to want to just hit it and go out there, but do yourself, the industry, all of us, and your hospital and everybody else a favor and take it at stride and properly prepare yourself, proper gear, proper riding boots. That's one of our biggest injuries that we see is ankles and stuff, right, out here in this sport. So proper riding boots, proper riding gear. There's so many companies, even Harley's coming out with, and I got a chance, I've been riding for Climb for a lot of years now, but I had a chance for our press assets and stuff to actually try the Revit on, and it's a quality garment as well. And so really, I guess, protection. And then, if you drop your bike, get up in Captain Jacket or whatever that is, or Captain Morgan's, whichever one, do the pirate on it and honk and celebrate that. Get over the oh my God, I dropped my bike.
Yeah, the anxiety of it, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. All right. Thanks, Kelly. And your brother, Matt? My other brother, Matt.
We'll let Pierre and Matt come last. But I would say, for me, give Pan Am a shot. I think if you were not into adventure riding, it's a bike that allows you, if you're into riding at all and you like performance, you like a bike that can do everything, give it a shot. Pan Am can take you places where you would not have gone before. and that's what we intended it to be, and that's exactly what it is, and that's what we noticed when we wrote it. So I would say give it a shot.
Awesome. And the other brother, Matt.
Yeah, you know what? My advice is if you're thinking about, just do it. You will not regret it. There are so many beautiful places in this country and around the world that you can go see. You just need to do it. And like I mentioned earlier, I just on a whim got into it because my dad and I were going to a wedding in South Africa. We were like, oh, we probably should rent bikes while we're here. And, I haven't looked back since then. So, Kelly, to Kelly's point, obviously I think training is huge, but just do it. You will not regret it. There's just so many cool places. And if you like kayaking, you like hiking, this motorcycle is just going to get you someplace cool to go do those things. So it's a great utility tool.
Yeah, awesome. And nothing like, I always say, life is short. Explore the world and explore yourself.
Ride safe, have fun.
That's right. Ride safe, have fun.
There's so many times in this country where I've lost track of how many times I've gone back and forth. And there's so many roads now that I've ridden over again, but there's always been those roads that I've looked down and go, I wonder where those go. And I've actually ridden the Mokidugue Highway and Valley of the Gods on my road glide where people are like, what are you doing?
So did I.
Right? And now to be able to go back on the Pan America or just the adventure bike opens up so many other doors of those roads less traveled.
Oh man, it'd be cool to see a rally version of the Pan Am. What do you think? Mexican 1000 guys? What are you gonna do? Turn it up. Let's turn it up. Well, all right, guys. Thanks very much for coming on tonight. I know you guys have been tired, really just running around getting this thing ready. I can't imagine what the past few years have been like, but the amount of anticipation and the work that has to go into what you guys have been doing over the past couple months, I know is tremendous. A lot of people don't understand how hard it is to bring something to market from an idea and a concept. It's not unlike having a kid. Something comes into the world and it has its own life. And you have to support it. It's going to make its own mistakes and people are going to see it kind of differently, but you just have to love it to pieces. And in this case, ride the crap out of it, right?
That's right.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Please stick around for a few minutes while we close out the show. But again, thanks very much for coming on tonight. Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. All right. Well, that was absolutely fantastic. Really love having these guys on. Thanks to Kelly and her brother Matt and her other brother Matt. I don't know why I'm so stuck on that. For coming on tonight's show. We're always so excited when new models come to the market, giving us more options to get our ADV on. That said, this is an exciting new era for Harley Davidson, and I believe we have a lot to look forward to, and wish all the luck to the Harley crew as they explore new directions, both in bikes and themselves personally. And of course, as Louds has said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So everyone, please, for more information on the Pan America, please visit HarleyDavidson.com, and also Kelly, I forgot to add it in the lower third, where it's short on space. She is a ThrottleGirl, and you can find her on Instagram and all over the place. But now for the next show. Everyone, please join us next month for another great ADVMoto live, this time number 27, in heaven, on July 8th with prolific traveler and blogger Kinga Tanaeska. I hope I said that right. Hopefully in the next month I will learn to say it correctly, aka on her bike. She's been riding around the world solo since 2017. We'll get an update on her travels and what it takes to create and publish a ton of different content while on the road. As always, your support means a lot. Keeps the motorcycle world running for sure. Visit venturemotorcycle.com for more stories, news, reviews, videos, podcasts, and more. Don't forget, smash the bejesus out of that like and subscribe button. Let us know what you'd like to see in the show in the comments below. And until next time, from everybody here at ADVMoto, ride safe, have fun, And the adventure is you.